Thank you. We are advancing with unbridled optimism and lifting our citizens of every race, color, religion, and creed very, very high. Since my election, we have created 7 million new jobs, 5 million more than government experts projected during the previous administration. The unemployment rate is the lowest in over half a century. And very incredibly, the average unemployment rate under my administration is lower than any administration in the history of our country. If we hadn't reversed the failed economic policies of the previous administration, the world would not now be witnessing this great economic success. The unemployment rate for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Asian Americans has reached the lowest levels in history. African American youth unemployment has reached an all-time low. African American poverty has declined to the lowest rate ever recorded. The unemployment rate for women reached the lowest level in almost 70 years, and last year women filled 72% of all new jobs added. The veterans' unemployment rate dropped to a record low. The unemployment rate for disabled Americans has reached an all-time low. Workers without a high school diploma have achieved the lowest unemployment rate recorded in U.S. history. A record number of young Americans are now employed. Under the last administration, more than 10 million people were added to the food stamp rolls. Under my administration, 7 million Americans have come off food stamps and 10 million people have been lifted off of welfare. In 8 years under the last administration, over 300,000 working-age people dropped out of the workforce. In just 3 years of my administration, 3.5 million people, working-age people, have joined the workforce. Since my election, the net worth of the bottom half of wage earners has increased by 47%, 3 times faster than the increase for the top 1%. After decades of flat and falling incomes, wages are rising fast, and wonderfully, they are rising fastest for low-income workers who have seen a 16% pay increase since my election. This is a blue-collar boom. Real median household income is now at the highest level ever recorded. Since my election, U.S. stock markets have soared 70%, adding more than $12 trillion to our nation's wealth, transcending anything anyone believed was possible. This is a record. It is something that every country in the world is looking up to. They admire. Consumer confidence has just reached amazing new highs. All of those millions of people with 401ks and pensions are doing far better than they have ever done before, with increases of 60, 70, 80, 90, and 100% and even more. Jobs and investments are pouring into 9,000 previously neglected neighborhoods thanks to Opportunity Zones, a plan spearheaded by Senator Tim Scott as part of our great Republican tax cuts. In other words, wealthy people and companies are pouring money into poor neighborhoods or areas that haven't seen investment in many decades, creating jobs, energy, and excitement. This is the first time that these deserving communities have seen anything like this. It's all working. Opportunity Zones are helping Americans like Army veteran Tony Rankins from Cincinnati, Ohio. After struggling with drug addiction, Tony lost his job, his house, and his family. He was homeless. But then Tony found a construction company that invests in Opportunity Zones. He is now a top tradesman, drug-free, reunited with his family, and he is here tonight. Tony, keep up the great work, Tony. Thank you, Tony. Our roaring economy has, for the first time ever, given many former prisoners the ability to get a great job and a fresh start. This second chance at life is made possible because we passed landmark criminal justice reform into law. Everybody said that criminal justice reform couldn't be done, but I got it done, and the people in this room got it done. Thanks to our bold regulatory reduction campaign, the United States has become the #1 producer of oil and natural gas anywhere in the world by far. With the tremendous progress we have made over the past 3 years, America is now energy independent, and energy jobs, like so many other elements of our country, are at a record high. We are doing numbers that no one would have thought possible just 3 years ago. Likewise, we are restoring our nation's manufacturing might, even though predictions were, as you all know, that this could never, ever be done. After losing 60,000 factories under the previous 2 administrations, America has now gained 12,000 new factories under my administration, with thousands upon thousands of plants and factories being planned or being built. Companies are not leaving. They are coming back to the USA. The fact is that everybody wants to be where the action is, and the United States of America is indeed the place where the action is. One of the biggest promises I made to the American people was to replace the disastrous NAFTA trade deal. In fact, unfair trade is perhaps the single biggest reason that I decided to run for president. Following NAFTA's adoption, our nation lost 1 in 4 manufacturing jobs. Many politicians came and went pledging to change or replace NAFTA, only to do so, and then absolutely nothing happened. But unlike so many who came before me, I keep my promises. We did our job. 6 days ago, I replaced NAFTA and signed the brand new U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement into law. The USMCA will create nearly 100,000 new high-paying American auto jobs and massively boost exports for our farmers, ranchers, and factory workers. It will also bring trade with Mexico and Canada to a much higher level, but also to be a much greater degree of fairness and reciprocity. We will have that fairness and reciprocity, and I say that finally because it's been many, many years that we were treated fairly on trade. This is the first major trade deal in many years to earn the strong backing of America's labor unions. I also promised our citizens that I would impose tariffs to confront China's massive theft of America's jobs. Our strategy has worked. Days ago, we signed the groundbreaking new agreement with China that will defend our workers, protect our intellectual property, bring billions and billions of dollars into our treasury, and open vast new markets for products made and grown right here in the USA. For decades, China has taken advantage of the United States. Now we have changed that. But at the same time, we have perhaps the best relationship we've ever had with China, including with President Xi. They respect what we've done because, quite frankly, they could never really believe that they were able to get away with what they were doing year after year, decade after decade, without someone in our country stepping up and saying, "That's enough." Now we want to rebuild our country, and that's exactly what we're doing. We are rebuilding our country. As we restore American leadership throughout the world, we are once again standing up for freedom, in our hemisphere.
The State of the Union.
That's why my administration reversed the failing policies of the previous administration on Cuba. We are supporting the hopes of Cubans, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans to restore democracy. The United States is leading a 59-nation diplomatic coalition against the socialist dictator of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro.
The State of the Union in the Chamber of the House of Representatives.
Maduro is an illegitimate ruler, a tyrant who brutalizes his people, but Maduro's grip on tyranny will be smashed and broken. Here this evening is a very brave man who carries with him the hopes, dreams, and aspirations of all Venezuelans. Joining us in the gallery is the true and legitimate president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido. Mr. President, please take this message back to your family. Thank you, Mr. President. Great honor. Thank you very much. Please take this message back that all Americans are united with the Venezuelan people in their righteous struggle for freedom. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you very much. Socialism destroys nations, but always remember freedom unifies the soul. To safeguard American liberty, we have invested a record-breaking $2.2 trillion in the United States military. We have purchased the finest planes, missiles, rockets, ships, and every other form of military equipment, and it's all made right here in the USA. We are also getting our allies, finally, to help pay their fair share. I have raised contributions from other NATO members by more than $400 billion, and the number of allies meeting their minimum obligations has more than doubled. And just weeks ago, for the first time since President Truman established the Air Force, more than 70 years earlier, we created a brand new branch of the United States Armed Forces. It's called the Space Force. Very important. In the gallery tonight, we have a young gentleman, and what he wants so badly, 13 years old, Ian Lawnfay. He's an 8th grader from Arizona. Ian, please stand up. Ian has always dreamed of going to space, He was the first in his class and among the youngest at an aviation academy. He aspires to go to the Air Force Academy, and then he has his eye on the Space Force. As Ian says, most people look up at space. I want to look down on the world. But sitting behind Ian tonight is his greatest hero of them all. Charles McGee was born in Cleveland, Ohio, 1 century ago. Charles is one of the last surviving Tuskegee Airmen, the first black fighter pilots, and he also happens to be Ian's great-grandfather. Incredible story. After more than 130 combat missions in World War II, he came back home to a country still struggling for civil rights and went on to serve America in Korea and Vietnam. On December 7th, Charles celebrated his 100th birthday. A few weeks ago, I signed a bill promoting Charles McGee to Brigadier General, and earlier today, I pinned the stars on his shoulders in the Oval Office. General McGee, our nation salutes you. Thank you, sir. From the Pilgrims to the founders, from the soldiers at Valley Forge to the marchers at Selma, and from President Lincoln to the Reverend Martin Luther King, Americans have always rejected limits on our children's future. Members of Congress, we must never forget that the only victories that matter in Washington are victories that deliver for the American people. The people are the heart of our country. Their dreams are the soul of our country, and their love is what powers and sustains our country. We must always remember that our job is to put America first. The next step forward in building an inclusive society is making sure that every young American gets a great education and the opportunity to achieve the American dream. Yet for too long, countless American children have been trapped in failing government schools. To rescue these students, 18 states have created school choice in the form of opportunity scholarships. The programs are so popular that tens of thousands of students remain on a waiting list. One of those students is Janiyah Davis, a fourth grader from Philadelphia. Janiyah. Jania's mom, Stephanie, is a single parent. She would do anything to give her daughter a better future. But last year, that future was put further out of reach when Pennsylvania's governor vetoed legislation to expand school choice to 50,000 children. Jania and Stephanie are in the gallery. Stephanie, thank you so much for being here with your beautiful daughter. Thank you very much. But Jania, I have some good news for you, because I am pleased to inform you that your long wait is over. I can proudly announce tonight that an opportunity scholarship has become available. It's going to you, and you will soon be heading to the school of your choice. Now I call on Congress to give 1 million American children the same opportunity Jania has just received. Pass the Education Freedom Scholarships and Opportunities Act, because no parent should be forced to send their child to a failing government school. Every young person should have a safe and secure environment in which to learn and to grow. For this reason, our magnificent First Lady has launched the Be Best initiative to advance a safe, healthy, supportive, and drug-free life for the next generation, online, in school, and in our communities. Thank you, Melania, for your extraordinary love and profound care for America's children. Thank you very much. My administration is determined to give our citizens the opportunities they need, regardless of age or background. Through our pledge to American workers, over 400 companies will also provide new jobs and education opportunities to almost 15 million Americans. My budget also contains an exciting vision for our nation's high schools. Tonight, I ask Congress to support our students and back my plan to offer vocational and technical education in every single high school in America. To expand equal opportunity, I am also proud that we achieved record and permanent funding for our nation's historically black colleges and universities. A good life for American families also requires the most affordable, innovative, and high-quality health care system on earth. Before I took office, health insurance premiums had more than doubled in just 5 years. I moved quickly to provide affordable alternatives. Our new plans are up to 60% less expensive and better. I've also made an ironclad pledge to American families. We will always protect patients with pre-existing conditions. And we will always protect your Medicare, and we will always protect your Social Security, always. The American patient should never be blindsided by medical bills. That is why I signed an executive order requiring price transparency. Many experts believe that transparency, which will go into full effect at the beginning of next year, will be even bigger than health care reform. It will save families massive amounts of money for substantially better care. But as we work to improve Americans' health care, there are those who want to take away your health care, take away your doctor, and abolish private insurance entirely. 132 lawmakers in this room have endorsed legislation to impose a socialist takeover of our health care system, wiping out the private health insurance plans of 180 million very happy Americans. To those watching at home tonight, I want you to know we will never let socialism destroy American health care. Over 130 legislators in this chamber have endorsed legislation that would bankrupt our nation by providing free taxpayer-funded health care to millions of illegal aliens, forcing taxpayers to subsidize free care for anyone in the world who unlawfully crosses our borders. These proposals would raid the Medicare benefits of our seniors and that our seniors depend on, while acting as a powerful lure for illegal immigration. That is what is happening in California and other states. Their systems are totally out of control, costing taxpayers vast and unaffordable amounts of money. If forcing American taxpayers to provide unlimited free health care to illegal aliens sounds fair to you, then stand with the radical left. But if you believe that we should defend American patients and American seniors, then stand with me and pass legislation to prohibit free government health care for illegal aliens.
President Trump's third State of the Union address on C-SPAN Radio in the chamber of the House of Representatives.
This will be a tremendous boon to our already very strongly guarded southern border, where, as we speak, a long, tall, and very powerful wall is being built. We have now completed over 100 miles and have over 500 miles fully completed in a very short period of time. Early next year, we will have substantially more than 500 miles completed. My administration is also taking on the big pharmaceutical companies. We have approved a record number of affordable generic drugs, and medicines are being approved by the FDA at a faster clip than ever before. And I was pleased to announce last year that for the first time in 51 years, the cost of prescription drugs actually went down. And working together, Congress can reduce drug prices substantially from current levels. I've been speaking to Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa and others in Congress in order to get something on drug pricing done, and done quickly and properly. I'm calling for bipartisan legislation that achieves the goal of dramatically lowering prescription drug prices. get a bill on my desk and I will sign it into law immediately. With unyielding commitment, we are curbing the opioid epidemic. Drug overdose deaths declined for the first time in nearly 30 years. Among the states hardest hit, Ohio is down 22%, Pennsylvania is down 18%, Wisconsin is down 10%, and we will not quit until we have beaten the opioid epidemic once and for all. Protecting Americans' health also means fighting infectious diseases. We are coordinating with the Chinese government and working closely together on the coronavirus outbreak in China. My administration will take all necessary steps to safeguard our citizens from this threat. We have launched ambitious new initiatives to substantially improve care for Americans with kidney disease, Alzheimer's, and those struggling with mental health. And because Congress was so good as to fund my request, new cures for childhood cancer, and we will eradicate the AIDS epidemic in America by the end of this decade. Almost every American family knows the pain when a loved one is diagnosed with a serious illness. Here tonight is a special man, beloved by millions of Americans, who just received a stage 4 advanced cancer diagnosis. This is not good news, but what is good news is that he is the greatest fighter and winner that you will ever meet. Rush Limbaugh, thank you for your decades of tireless devotion to our country. And Rush, in recognition of all that you have done for our nation, the millions of people a day that you speak to and that you inspire, and all of the incredible work that you have done for charity, I am proud to announce tonight that you will be receiving our country's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I will now ask the First Lady of the United States to present you with the honor, please. Rush and Catherine, congratulations. Thank you, Catherine. As we pray for all who are sick, we know that America is constantly achieving new medical breakthroughs. In 2017, doctors at St. Luke's Hospital in Kansas City delivered one of the earliest premature babies ever to survive. Born at just 21 weeks and 6 days and weighing less than a pound, Ellie Schneider was a born fighter. Through the skill of her doctors and the prayers of her parents, little Ellie kept on winning the battle of life. Today, Ellie is a strong, healthy 2-year-old girl sitting with her amazing mother, Robin. In the gallery, Ellie and Robin, we are glad to have you with us tonight. Ellie reminds us that every child is a miracle of life. And thanks to modern medical wonders, 50% of very premature babies delivered at the hospital where Ellie was born now survive. It's an incredible thing. Thank you very much. Our goal should be to ensure that every baby has the best chance to thrive and grow just like Ellie. That is why I'm asking Congress to provide an additional $50 million to fund neonatal research for America's youngest patients. That is why I'm also calling upon members of Congress here tonight to pass legislation finally banning the late-term abortion of babies. Whether we are Republican, Democrat, or Independent, surely we must all agree that every human life is a sacred gift from God. As we support America's moms and dads, I was recently proud to sign the law providing new parents in the federal workforce paid family leave, serving as a model for the rest of the country. Now I call on Congress to pass the bipartisan Advancing Support for Working Families Act, extending family leave to mothers and fathers all across our nation. $40 million American families have an average $2,200 extra thanks to our child tax credit. I've also overseen historic funding increases for high-quality child care, enabling 17 states to help more children, many of which have reduced or eliminated their wait lists altogether. And I sent Congress a plan with a vision to further expand access to high-quality child care and urge you to act immediately. To protect the environment, days ago I announced that the United States will join the 1 Trillion Trees Initiative, an ambitious effort to bring together government and private sector to plant new trees in America and all around the world. We must also rebuild America's infrastructure. I ask you to pass Senator John Barrasso's highway bill to invest in new roads, bridges, and tunnels all across our land. I'm also committed to ensuring that every citizen can have access to high-speed internet, including and especially in rural America. A better tomorrow for all Americans also requires us to keep America safe. That means supporting the men and women of law enforcement at every level, including our nation's heroic ICE officers. Last year, our brave ICE officers arrested more than 120,000 criminal aliens charged with nearly 10,000 burglaries, 5,000 sexual assaults, 45,000 violent assaults, and 2,000 murders. Tragically, there are many cities in America where radical politicians have chosen to provide sanctuary for these criminal illegal aliens. In sanctuary cities, local officials order police to release dangerous criminal aliens to prey upon the public instead of handing them over to ICE to be safely removed. Just 29 days ago, a criminal alien freed by the sanctuary city of New York was charged with the brutal rape and murder of a 92-year-old woman. The killer had been previously arrested for assault, but under New York's sanctuary policies, he was set free. If the city had honored ICE's detainer request, his victim would still be alive today. The state of California passed an outrageous law declaring their whole state to be a sanctuary for criminal illegal immigrants. A very terrible sanctuary with catastrophic results. Here is just one tragic example. In December 2018, California police detained an illegal alien with 5 prior arrests, including convictions for robbery and assault. But as required by California's sanctuary law, local authorities released him. Days later, the criminal alien went on a gruesome spree of deadly violence. He viciously shot one man going about his daily work. He approached a woman sitting in her car and shot her in the arm and in the chest. He walked into a convenience store and wildly fired his weapon. He hijacked a truck and smashed into vehicles, critically injuring innocent victims. One of the victims is a terrible, terrible situation. Died, 51-year-old American named Rocky Jones. Rocky was at a gas station when this vile criminal fired 8 bullets at him from close range, murdering him in cold blood. Rocky left behind a devoted family, including his brothers, who loved him more than anything else in the world. One of his grieving brothers is here with us tonight. Jody, would you please stand? Jody, thank you.
This is President Trump's third State of the Union address in the chamber of the House of Representatives on C-SPAN Radio, WCSP-FM, Washington.
Jody, our hearts weep for your loss, and we will not rest until you have justice. Senator Thom Tillis has introduced legislation to allow Americans like Jody to sue sanctuary cities and states when a loved one is hurt or killed as a result of these deadly practices. I ask Congress to pass the Justice for Victims of Sanctuary Cities Act immediately. The United States of America should be a sanctuary for law-abiding Americans, not criminal aliens. In the last 3 years, ICE has arrested over 5,000 wicked human traffickers, and I have signed 9 pieces of legislation to stamp out the menace of human trafficking domestically and all around the globe. My administration has undertaken an unprecedented effort to secure the southern border of the United States. Before I came into office, if you showed up illegally on our southern border and were arrested, you were simply released and allowed into our country, never to be seen again. My administration has ended catch and release. If you come illegally, you will now be promptly removed from our country. Very importantly, we entered into historic cooperation agreements with the governments of Mexico, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. As a result of our unprecedented efforts, illegal crossings are down 75% since May, dropping 8 straight months in a row. And as the wall rapidly goes up, drug seizures rise, and the border crossings are going down and going down very rapidly. Last year I traveled to the border in Texas and met Chief Patrol Agent Raul Ortiz. Over the last 24 months, Agent Ortiz and his team have seized more than 200,000 pounds of poisonous narcotics, arrested more than 3,000 human smugglers, and rescued more than 2,000 migrants. Days ago, Agent Ortiz was promoted to Deputy Chief of Border Patrol, and he joins us tonight. Chief Ortiz, please stand. A grateful nation thanks you and all of the heroes of Border Patrol and ICE. Thank you very much. Thank you. To build on these historic gains, we are working on legislation to replace our outdated and randomized immigration system with one based on merit, welcoming those who follow the rules, contribute to our economy, support themselves financially, and uphold our values. With every action, my administration is restoring the rule of law and reasserting the culture of American freedom. Working with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, thank you, Mitch, and his colleagues in the Senate, we have confirmed a record number of 187 new federal judges to uphold our Constitution as written. This includes 2 brilliant new Supreme Court justices, Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh. Thank you. And we have many in the pipeline. My administration is also defending religious liberty, and that includes the constitutional right to pray in public schools. In America, we don't punish prayer. We don't tear down crosses. We don't ban symbols of faith. We don't muzzle preachers and pastors. In America, we celebrate faith. We cherish religion. We lift our voices in prayer, and we raise our sights to the glory of God. Just as we believe in the First Amendment, we also believe in another constitutional right that is under siege all across our country. So long as I am president, I will always protect your Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. In reaffirming our heritage as a free nation, we must remember that America has always been a frontier nation. Now we must embrace the next frontier, America's manifest destiny in the stars. I am asking Congress to fully fund the Artemis program to ensure that the next man and the first woman on the moon will be American astronauts, using this as a launching pad to ensure that America is the first nation to plant its flag on Mars. My administration is also strongly defending our national security and combating radical Islamic terrorism. Last week I announced a groundbreaking plan for peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Recognizing that all past attempts have failed, we must be determined and creative in order to stabilize the region and give millions of young people the chance to realize a better future. 3 years ago, the barbarians of ISIS held over 20,000 square miles of territory in Iraq and Syria. Today, the ISIS territorial caliphate has been 100% destroyed, and the founder and leader of ISIS, the bloodthirsty killer known as al-Baghdadi, is dead. We are joined this evening by Carl and Marcia Mueller. After graduating from college, their beautiful daughter, Kyla, became a humanitarian aid worker. She once wrote, "Some people find God in church. Some people find God in nature. Some people find God in love. I find God in suffering. I've known for some time what my life's work is, using my hands as tools to relieve suffering." In 2013, while caring for suffering civilians in Syria, Kayla was kidnapped, tortured, and enslaved by ISIS and kept as a prisoner of al-Baghdadi himself. After more than 500 horrifying days of captivity, al-Baghdadi murdered young, beautiful Kayla. She was just 26 years old. On the night that U.S. Special Forces operations ended al-Baghdadi's miserable life, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, received a call in the Situation Room. He was told that the brave men of the elite Special Forces team that so perfectly carried out the operation had given their mission a name, Task Force 814. It was a reference to a special day, August 14th, Kayla's birthday. Carl and Marcia, America's warriors, never forgot Kayla, and neither will we. Thank you. Every day, America's men and women in uniform demonstrate the infinite depth of love that dwells in the human heart. One of these American heroes was Army Staff Sergeant Christopher Hake. On his second deployment to Iraq in 2008, Sergeant Hake wrote a letter to his 1-year-old son, Gage. "I will be with you again," he wrote to Gage. "I will teach you to ride your first bike, build your first sandbox, watch you play sports, and see you have kids also. I love you, son. Take care of your mother. I am always with you, Daddy." On Easter Sunday of 2008, Chris was out on patrol in Baghdad when his Bradley fighting vehicle was hit by a roadside bomb. That night he made the ultimate sacrifice for our country. Sergeant Hake now rests in eternal glory in Arlington, and his wife Kelly is in the gallery tonight, joined by their son, who is now a 13-year-old and doing very, very well. To Kelly and Gage, Chris will live in our hearts forever. He is looking down on you now. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you both very much. The terrorist responsible for killing Sergeant Hake was Qasem Soleimani, who provided the deadly roadside bomb that took Chris's life. Soleimani was the Iranian regime's most ruthless butcher, a monster who murdered or wounded thousands of American service members in Iraq. As the world's top terrorist, Soleimani orchestrated the deaths of countless men, women, and children. He directed the December assault and went on to assault U.S. forces in Iraq, was actively planning new attacks when we hit him very hard. And that's why last month at my direction, the U.S. military executed a flawless precision strike that killed Soleimani and terminated his evil reign of terror forever. Our message to the terrorists is clear. You will never escape American justice. If you attack our citizens, you forfeit your life. In recent months, we have seen proud Iranians raise their voices against their oppressive rulers. The Iranian regime must abandon its pursuit of nuclear weapons, stop spreading terror, death, and destruction, and start working for the good of its own people. Because of our powerful sanctions, the Iranian economy is doing very, very poorly. We can help them make a very good and short-time recovery. It can all go very quickly, but perhaps they are too proud or too foolish to ask for that help. We are here. Let's see which road they choose. It is totally up to them. As we defend American lives, we are working to end America's wars in the Middle East. In Afghanistan, the determination and valor of our warfighters has allowed us to make tremendous progress, and peace talks are now underway. I am not looking to kill hundreds of thousands of people in Afghanistan, many of them totally innocent. It is also not our function to serve other nations as law enforcement agencies. These are warfighters that we have, the best in the world, and they either want to fight to win or not fight at all. We are working to finally end America's longest war and bring our troops back home. war places a heavy burden on our nation's extraordinary military families, especially spouses like Amy Williams from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and her 2 children, 6-year-old Eliana and 3-year-old Rowan. Amy works full-time and volunteers countless hours helping other military families. For the past 7 months, she has done it all while her husband, Sergeant First Class Townsend Williams, is in Afghanistan on his 4th deployment in the Middle East. Amy's kids haven't seen their father's face in many months. Amy, your family's sacrifice makes it possible for all of our families to live in safety and in peace, and we want to thank you. Thank you, Amy.
President Trump's 3rd State of the Union address in the chamber of the House of Representatives, right here on C-SPAN Radio.
But Amy, there is one more thing. Tonight we have a very special surprise. I am thrilled to inform you that your husband is back from deployment. He is here with us tonight, and we couldn't keep him waiting any longer. Welcome home, Sergeant Williams. Thank you very much. As the world bears witness tonight, America is a land of heroes. This is a place where greatness is born, where destinies are forged, and where legends come to life. This is the home of Thomas Edison and Teddy Roosevelt, of many great generals, including Washington, Pershing, Patton, and MacArthur. This is the home of Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, Amelia Earhart, Harriet Tubman, the Wright brothers, Neil Armstrong, and so many more. This is the country where children learn names like Wyatt Earp, Davy Crockett, and Annie Oakley. This is the place where the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth and where Texas patriots made their last stand at the Alamo. The beautiful, beautiful Alamo. The American nation was carved out of the vast frontier by the toughest, strongest, fiercest, and most determined men and women ever to walk on the face of the earth. Our ancestors braved the unknown, tamed the wilderness, settled the Wild West, lifted millions from poverty, disease, and hunger, vanquished tyranny and fascism, ushered the world to new heights of science and medicine, laid down the railroads, dug out the canals, raised up the skyscrapers, and ladies and gentlemen, our ancestors built the most exceptional republic ever to exist in all of human history, and we are making it greater than ever before. This is our glorious and magnificent inheritance. We are Americans. We are pioneers. We are the pathfinders. We settled the new world. We built the modern world. And we change history forever by embracing the eternal truth that everyone is made equal by the hand of Almighty God. America is the place where anything can happen. America is the place where anyone can rise. And here, on this land, on this soil, on this continent, the most incredible dreams come true. This nation is our canvas, and this country is our masterpiece. We look at tomorrow and see unlimited frontiers just waiting to be explored. Our brightest discoveries are not yet known. Our most thrilling stories are not yet told. Our grandest journeys are not yet made. The American age, the American epic, the American adventure has only just begun. Our spirit is still young. The sun is still rising. God's grace is still shining. And my fellow Americans, the best is yet to come. Thank you. God bless you. And God bless America. Thank you very much.
This was President Trump's third State of the Union address in the chamber of the House of Representatives.
Unbelievable. Awesome speech.
Here's Gretchen Whitmer.
Good evening. I'm honored to be here and grateful that you're tuning in. I'm Gretchen Whitmer, the 49th governor of the great state of Michigan. Tonight, I'm at my daughter Sherry and Sydney's public school, East Lansing High School. We're here today with families and parents, teachers, and most importantly, students. I want to thank you all for coming, but tonight I'm going to talk to those of you who are watching at home. I'd need a lot more than 10 minutes to respond to what the president just said. So instead of talking about what he is saying, I'm going to highlight what Democrats are doing. After all, you can listen to what someone says, but to know the truth, watch what they do. Michiganders are no different from Americans everywhere. We love our families and want a good life today and a better life tomorrow for our kids. We work hard, and we expect our government to work hard for us as well. We have grit and value loyalty, and we still root for the Detroit Lions. We and all Americans might be weary of today's politics, but we must stay engaged. Our country, our democracy, our future demand it. We're capable of great things when we work together. We cannot forget that despite the dishonesty and division of the last few years, and that we heard tonight from the President of the United States, together we have boundless potential. And young Americans are proving that every day by taking action. That's what I want to focus on tonight. Monty Scott is 13 years old and lives in Muskegon Heights, Michigan. Monty Street was covered in potholes. They were ankle deep, and he got tired of waiting for them to get fixed. So he grabbed a shovel and a bucket of dirt and filled them in himself. During my campaign, people told me to fix the damn roads because blown tires and broken windshields are downright dangerous. And car repairs take money from rent, child care, or groceries. And we, the Democrats, are doing something about it. In Illinois, Governor J.B. Pritzker passed a multi-billion-dollar plan to rebuild their roads and bridges. Governor Phil Murphy is replacing lead pipes in New Jersey. All across the country, Democratic leaders are rebuilding bridges, fixing roads, expanding broadband, and cleaning up drinking water. Everyone in this country benefits when we invest in infrastructure. Congressional Democrats have presented proposals to keep us moving forward, but President Trump and the Republicans in the Senate are blocking the path. When it comes to infrastructure, Monty has tried to do more with a shovel and a pile of dirt than the Republicans in D.C. have with the Oval Office and the U.S. Senate. Bullying people on Twitter doesn't fix bridges. It burns them. Our energy should be used to solve problems. And it's true for healthcare too. For me, for so many Americans, healthcare is personal, not political. When I was 30, I became a member of the sandwich generation. That means I was sandwiched between two generations of my own family for whom I was the primary caregiver. I was holding down a new job, caring for my newborn daughter, as well as my mom at the end of her brain cancer battle. I was up all night with a baby, and during the day, I had to fight my mom's insurance company when they wrongly denied her coverage for chemotherapy. It was hard. It exposed the harsh realities of our workplaces, our healthcare system, and our child care system. And it changed me. I lost patience for people who are just talk and no action. So as a state senator, I worked with a Republican governor and legislature to expand health care coverage to more than 680,000 Michiganders under the Affordable Care Act. Today, Democrats from Maine to Montana are expanding coverage and lowering costs. In Kansas, Governor Laura Kelly is working across the aisle to bring Medicaid coverage to tens of thousands. In New Mexico, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham enshrined ACA protections into law. Every Democrat running for president has a plan to expand health care for all Americans. Every one of them has supported the Affordable Care Act with coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. They may have different plans, but the goal is the same. President Trump, sadly, has a different plan. He's asking the courts to rip those life-saving protections away. It's pretty simple. Democrats are trying to make your health care better. Republicans in Washington are trying to take it away. Think about kids like 17-year-old Blake Carroll from Idaho, who organized a fundraiser to pay for his mom's colon cancer treatment. Or 19-year-old Ebony Myers from Utah, who sells art to help pay for her own rare genetic disorder treatment. No one should have to crowdsource their health care. Not in America. But the reality is, not everyone in America has a job with health care and benefits. In fact, many have jobs that don't even pay enough to cover their monthly expenses. It doesn't matter what the president says about the stock market. What matters is that millions of people struggle to get by or don't have enough money at the end of the month after paying for transportation, student loans, or prescription drugs. American workers are hurting. In my own state, our neighbors in Wisconsin and Ohio, Pennsylvania, and all over the country, wages have stagnated while CEO pay has skyrocketed. So when the president says the economy is strong, my question is, strong for whom? Strong for the wealthy who are reaping rewards from tax cuts they don't need? The American economy needs to be a different kind of strong. Strong for the science teacher spending her own money to buy supplies for her classroom. Strong for the single mom picking up extra hours so she can afford her daughter's soccer cleats. Strong for the small business owner who has to make payroll at the end of the month. Michigan invented the middle class, so we know if the economy doesn't work for working people, it just doesn't work. Who fights for hardworking Americans? Democrats do. In the U.S. House, Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Democrats passed a landmark bill on equal pay. Another bill to give 30 million Americans a raise by increasing the minimum wage, and groundbreaking legislation to finally give Medicare the power to negotiate lower drug prices for America's seniors and families. Those 3 bills and more than 275 other bipartisan bills are just gathering dust on Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's desk. Senator McConnell, America needs you to move those bills. Meanwhile, Democrats across the country are getting things done. Pennsylvania's Governor Tom Wolf is expanding the right to overtime pay. Michigan is too. Because if you're on the clock, you deserve to get paid. Nevada Governor Steve Sisolak and North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper are working to give hard-working teachers a raise. And speaking of the classroom, Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers unilaterally increased school funding by $65 million last year. In Colorado, Governor Jared Polis has enacted free all-day kindergarten. And in 29 states, we've helped pass minimum wage hikes into law, which will lift people out of poverty and improve lives for families. That's strength. That's action. Democracy takes action. And that's why I'm so inspired by young people. They respond to mass shootings, demanding policies that make schools safer. They react to a world that's literally on fire, with fire in their bellies, to push leaders to finally take action on climate change. They take on a road filled with potholes with a shovel and some dirt. It's what gives me great confidence in our future. And it's why sometimes it feels like they're the adults in the room. But it shouldn't have to be that way. It's not their mess to clean up. It's ours. The choices we make today create their reality tomorrow. Young people, I'm talking to you and your parents and grandparents. Democrats want safe schools. We want everyone to have a path to a good life, whether it's through a union apprenticeship, a community college, a 4-year university, without drowning in debt. We want your water to be clean. We want you to love who you love and to live authentically as your true selves. And we want women to have autonomy over our bodies. We want our country welcoming, and everyone's vote counted. 2020 is a big year. It's the year my daughter Sherry will graduate from high school. It's also the year she'll cast her first ballot, along with millions of young Americans. The two things are connected, because walking across a graduation stage is as important as walking into the voting booth for the first time. Her future, all our kids' futures, will be determined not just by their dreams, but by our actions. As we witness the impeachment process in Washington, there are some things each of us, no matter our party, should demand. The truth matters. Facts matter. And no one should be above the law. It's not what those senators say. Tomorrow, it's about what they do that matters. Remember, listen to what people say, but watch what they do. It's time for action. Generations of Americans are counting on us. Let's not let them down. Thank you for listening. God bless America. Good night.
This is a re-air of C-SPAN radio programming from Tuesday. WCSPA from Washington.
And today, the Senate is in session, and senators continue to take advantage of the morning hour, morning business time, which has been set aside for senators to talk about the impeachment. They've been allotted 10 minutes each. On Monday, we heard from 15 senators, including West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin, who floated the idea of a censure of the president. And normally on Tuesdays, the Senate would recess for weekly party caucus lunches. While those meetings are scheduled, the Senate has not yet announced whether or not they will take that recess. And we will take advantage of this time now to take you to the floor of the Senate for remarks earlier from Senate Leader Mitch McConnell. He spoke about the impeachment at about 9:40 Tuesday morning.
Mr. President, these past weeks, the Senate has grappled with as grave a subject as we ever consider: a request from a majority in the House to remove the president. The framers took impeachment extremely seriously, but they harbored no illusions that these trials would always begin for the right reasons. Alexander Hamilton warned the demon of faction would extend his scepter over the House of Representatives at certain seasons. He warned that an intemperate or designing majority in the House might misuse impeachment as a weapon of ordinary politics rather than an emergency tool of last resort. The framers knew impeachment might begin with overheated passions and short-term factionalism, but they knew those things could not get the final say. So they placed the ultimate judgment not in the fractious lower chamber, but in the sober and stable Senate. They wanted impeachment trials to be fair to both sides. They wanted them to be timely, avoiding the procrastinated determination of the charges. They wanted us to take a deep breath and decide which outcome would reflect the facts, protect our institutions, and advance the common good. They called the Senate, quote, the most fit depository of this important trust. Tomorrow, we'll know whether that trust was well placed. The drive to impeach President Trump did not begin with the allegations before us. Here was reporting in April of 2016, this is before the president was the nominee. Donald Trump isn't even the Republican nominee yet, but impeachment is already on the lips of pundits, newspaper editorials, constitutional scholars, and even a few members of Congress. Here was the Washington Post headline minutes after President Trump's inauguration: the campaign to impeach President Trump has begun, the Washington Post said. The articles of impeachment before us were not even the first ones House Democrats introduced. This was a go-around number. Of roughly 7. Those previously alleged high crimes and misdemeanors, Mr. President, included things like being impolite to the press and to professional athletes. It insults the intelligence of the American people to pretend this was a solemn process reluctantly begun because of withheld foreign aid. No, Washington Democrats' position on this president has been clear literally for years. Their position was obvious when they openly rooted for the Mueller investigation to tear our country apart, and were disappointed when the facts proved otherwise. It was obvious when they sought to impeach the president over and over. Here's their real position, Mr. President. Washington Democrats think President Donald Trump committed a high crime or misdemeanor the moment he defeated Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election. That is the original sin of this presidency, that he won and they lost. Ever since, the nation has suffered through a grinding campaign against our norms and institutions from the same people who keep shouting that our norms and institutions need defending. A campaign to degrade our democracy and delegitimize our elections from the same people who shout that confidence in our democracy must be paramount. We've watched a major American political party adopt the following absurd proposition: we think this president is a bull in a china shop, so we're going to drive a bulldozer through the china shop to get rid of it. This fever led to the most rushed, least fair, and least thorough presidential impeachment inquiry in American history. The House inquiry into President Nixon spanned many months. The special prosecutor's investigation added many more months. With President Clinton, the independent counsel worked literally for years. It takes time to find facts. It takes time to litigate executive privilege, which happened in both those investigations. Litigating privilege questions is a normal step that investigators of both parties understood was their responsibility. But this time, no lengthy investigation, no serious inquiry. The House abandoned its own subpoenas. They had an arbitrary political deadline to meet. They had to impeach by Christmas. They had to impeach by Christmas. So in December, House Democrats realized the framers' nightmare. A purely partisan, majority-approved 2 articles of impeachment over bipartisan opposition. And after the Speaker of the House delayed for a month in a futile effort to dictate Senate process to senators, the articles finally arrived over here in the Senate. Over the course of the trial, senators have heard sworn video testimony from 13 witnesses, over 193 video clips. We have entered more than 28,000 pages of documents into evidence, including 17 depositions. And our members asked 180 questions. In contrast to the House proceedings, our trial gave both sides a fair platform. Our process tracked with the structure that senators adopted for the Clinton trial 20 years ago. Just as Democrats, such as the current Democratic leader and then Senator Joe Biden, argued at length in 1999, we recognize that Senate traditions impose no obligation to hear new live witness testimony if it is not necessary to decide the case. If it is not necessary to decide the case, let me emphasize, the House managers themselves said over and over that additional testimony was not necessary to prove their case. They claimed dozens of times that their existing case was, quote, overwhelming and incontrovertible. That was the House managers saying their evidence was overwhelming and incontrovertible. At the same time, they were arguing for more witnesses. But in reality, both of the House accusations are constitutionally incoherent. The obstruction of Congress charge is absurd and dangerous. House Democrats argued that any time the Speaker invokes the House sole power of impeachment, the President must do whatever the House demands. No questions asked. Invoking executive branch privileges and immunities in response to House subpoenas becomes an impeachable offense itself. Here's how Chairman Schiff put it back in October, quote, any action that forces us to litigate or have to consider litigation will be considered further evidence of obstruction of justice. That, Mr. President, is nonsense impeachment. That is nonsense. Impeachment is not some magical constitutional trump card that melts away the separations between the branches of government. The framers did not leave the House a secret constitutional steamroller that everyone somehow overlooked for 230 years. When Congress subpoenas executive branch officials with questions of privilege, the two sides either reach an accommodation or they go to court. That's the way it works. So, can you imagine if the shoe were on the other foot? How would Democrats and the press have responded if House Republicans had told President Obama, we don't want to litigate our subpoenas over fast and furious, so if you make us set foot in court, we'll just impeach you. We'll just impeach you. Of course, that's not what happened. The Republican House litigated its subpoenas for years until they prevailed. So much for obstruction of Congress. And the abuse of power charge is just as unpersuasive and dangerous. By passing that article, House Democrats gave in to a temptation that every previous House has resisted. They impeached a president without even alleging a crime known to our laws. Now, Mr. President, I do not subscribe to the legal theory that impeachment requires a violation of a criminal statute, but there are powerful reasons why for 230 years every presidential impeachment did in fact allege a criminal violation. The framers explicitly rejected impeachment for maladministration, a general charge under English law that basically encompassed bad management, a sort of general vote of no confidence, except in the most extreme circumstances, except for acts that overwhelmingly shocked the national conscience. The framers decided presidents must serve at the pleasure of the electorate, and not at the pleasure of House majorities. As Hamilton wrote, it is one thing to be subordinate to the laws and another to be dependent on the legislative body. So House Democrats sailed into the new and dangerous waters, the first impeachment unbound by the criminal law. Any House that felt it needed to take this radical step owed the country the most fair and painstaking process, the most rigorous investigation, the most bipartisan effort. Instead, we got the opposite, the exact opposite. The House managers argued that the president could not have been acting in the national interest because he acted inconsistently with their own conception of the national interest. Let me say that again. The House managers were basically arguing that the president could not have been acting in the national interest because he acted inconsistently with their conception of the national interest, a conception shared by some of the president's subordinates as well. This does not even approach a case for the first presidential removal in American history. It doesn't even approach it. Such an act cannot rest alone on the exercise of a constitutional power combined with concerns about whether the president's motivations were public or personal, and a disagreement over whether the exercise of the power was in the national interest. The framers gave our nation an ultimate tool for evaluating presidents' character and policy decisions. They're called elections. They're called elections. If Washington Democrats have a case to make against the president's reelection, they should go out and make it. Let them try to do what they failed to do 3 years ago and sell the American people on their vision for the country. I can certainly see why, given President Trump's remarkable achievements over the past 3 years, Democrats might feel a bit uneasy about defeating him at the ballot box. But they don't get to rip the choice away from the voters just because they're afraid they might lose again. They don't get to strike President Trump's name from the ballot just because, as one House Democrat put it, quote, "I'm concerned that if we don't impeach him, he'll get reelected." The impeachment power exists for a reason. It is no nullity, but invoking it on a partisan whim to settle 3-year-old political scores does not honor the framers' design. It insults the framers' design. Frankly, it's hard to believe that House Democrats ever really thought this reckless and precedent-breaking process would yield 67 votes to cross the Rubicon. Was their vision so clouded by partisanship that they really believed this would be anywhere near enough for the first presidential removal in American history? Or was success beside the point? Was this all an effort to hijack our institutions for a month-long political rally? Either way, Mr. President, the demon of faction has been on full display. But now it is time for him, the demon, to exit the stage. We have indeed witnessed an abuse of power. a grave abuse of power by just the kind of House majority that the framers warned us about. So tomorrow, the Senate must do what we were created to do. We've done our duty. We've considered all the arguments. We've studied the, quote, mountain of evidence, end quote. And tomorrow, we will vote. We must vote to reject the House abuse of power. Vote to protect our institutions. Vote to reject new precedents that would reduce the framers' design to rubble. Vote to keep factional fever from boiling over and scorching our republic. I urge every one of our colleagues to cast the vote the facts, the evidence, the Constitution, and the common good clearly require. Vote to acquit the President of these charges.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell on the floor of the Senate at the beginning of the day on Tuesday. You're listening to C-SPAN Radio. Well, the Senate continues to deliberate the 2 impeachment articles. Senators are taking to the floor to explain their positions. Time has been allotted for each senator to speak for up to 10 minutes. Here now remarks from Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer.
Mr. President, thank you very much.
We're in a quorum call.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, the majority leader can come up on the floor and repeat his talking points, but there are some salient points that are irrefutable. The first, this is the first impeachment trial of a president or impeachment trial of anybody else that was completed that has no witnesses and no documents. The American people are just amazed that our Republican friends would not even ask for witnesses and documents. I thought the House did a very good job. I thought they made a compelling case. But even if you didn't, the idea that that means you shouldn't have witnesses and documents when we're doing something as august, as important as an impeachment trial fails the laugh test. It makes people believe, correctly in my judgment, that the administration, its top people, and Senate Republicans are all hiding the truth. They're afraid of the truth. Second, the charges are extremely serious. To interfere in an election, to blackmail a foreign country, to interfere in our elections, gets at the very core of what our democracy is about. If Americans believe that they don't determine who is president, who is governor, who is senator, but some foreign potentate out of reach of any law enforcement can jaundice our elections, that's the beginning of end of democracy. So it's a serious charge. The Republicans refused to get the evidence because they were afraid of what it would show. And that's all that needs to be said. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer on the floor of the Senate earlier. Well, shortly thereafter, we heard from Republican Senator John Thune.
Madam President, tomorrow we will be voting on the 2 impeachment articles sent over to us by the House of Representatives, a process that, as the leader pointed out, really started from the very day this president took office. I will be voting to acquit the president for several reasons. First and foremost, I do not believe that the facts in this case rise to the high bar that the founders set for removal from office. The founders imposed a threshold for impeachment of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. In other words, very serious violations of the public trust. The founders were deliberate in their choice of words. They wanted to be clear that impeachment was a severe remedy to be deployed only for very serious violations. When George Mason proposed adding the term maladministration to the impeachment clause during the Constitutional Convention, the framers rejected the proposal because, as Madison pointed out, the term was too vague and would be equivalent to a tenure during pleasure of the Senate. The founders recognized that without safeguards, impeachment could quickly degenerate into a political weapon to be used to overturn elections when one faction or another decided that it didn't like the president. That's why the founders split the impeachment power, giving the House the sole authority to impeach, and the Senate the sole authority to try impeachments. And as a final check, the founders required a 2/3 supermajority vote in the Senate to remove a president from office. All of these things, Madam President, show just how seriously the founders regarded removing a duly elected president. They intended it as an extreme remedy to be used only in very grave circumstances. And I do not believe that the charges the House has leveled against the President meet that high bar. The House manager's presentation, which stretched over 22 hours, included testimony from more than a dozen witnesses. We also heard from the House managers during more than 16 hours of questions from senators. In all, about 180 questions. And we received more than 28,000 pages of testimony, evidence, and arguments from the House of Representatives. I considered all the evidence carefully, but ultimately I concluded that the two charges presented by the House managers, abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, did not provide a compelling case for removing this president. According to public reporting, House Democrats toyed with charging the president with bribery, believing that it polled well. But they didn't have the evidence to prove that charge or indeed to prove any actual crime. While allegations of specific criminal conduct may not be constitutionally required, they anchor impeachment in the law, and their absence is telling. Lacking evidence of a specific crime, the House decided to use the shotgun approach and throw everything under the catch-all abuse of power umbrella. Abuse of power, Madam President, is vaguely defined and subject to interpretation. In fact, I don't believe there has been a president in my lifetime who hasn't been accused of some form of abuse of power. For that reason, abuse of power seemed to me a fairly weak predicate on which to remove a democratically elected president from office. During the Clinton impeachment, I voted against the abuse of power article precisely because I believed it did not offer strong grounds for removing the duly elected president. With respect to the second article, obstruction of Congress, the House took issue with the president's assertion of legal privileges, including those rooted in the constitutional separation of powers. Of course, every president in recent memory has invoked such privileges. For example, when the Obama administration cited executive privilege to deny documents to Congress during the Fast and Furious gun running investigation. The House could have challenged the president's privilege claims by going through the traditional channel to resolve disputes between the executive and legislative branches, that being, of course, the courts. That's what was done in previous impeachment inquiries, like the Clinton impeachment. But the House skipped that step, Madam President, in hopes that the Senate would bail them out and compel testimony and documents that the House, in its rush to impeachment, was unwilling to procure. Again, this seemed like a very thin basis on which to remove a duly elected president from office. The facts of the case are that aid to Ukraine was released prior to the end of the fiscal year, and no investigation of the scandal-plagued firm Burisma or the Bidens was ever initiated. While we can debate the president's judgment when it comes to his dealings with Ukraine, or even conclude that his actions were inappropriate, the House's vague and overreaching impeachment charges do not meet the high bar set by the founders for removal from office. My second consideration, Madam President, in voting to acquit the President is the deeply partisan nature of the House's impeachment proceedings. The founders' overriding concern about impeachment was that partisan majorities could use impeachment as a political weapon. In Federalist 65, Alexander Hamilton speaks of the danger of impeachment being used by, and I quote, an intemperate or designing majority in the House of Representatives, end quote. By limiting the House's power to impeaching the President and not to removing him from office, the founders hoped that the Senate would act as a check on any attempt by the House to use the power of impeachment for partisan purposes. Unfortunately, the founders' concerns about partisanship were realized in this impeachment process.
Republican Senator John Thune.
Time in modern history, impeachment was initiated and conducted on a purely partisan basis. While the Nixon impeachment proceedings in the House are held up as an example of bipartisanship, even the impeachment of President Clinton was initiated with the support of more than 30 Democrats. By contrast, in this case, House and Democrats drove ahead in a completely partisan exercise. Then they rushed through the impeachment process at breakneck speed, rejecting a thorough investigation because they wanted to impeach the president as fast as possible. And then they expected the Senate to take on the House's investigative responsibility. Madam President, House Democrats paid lip service to the idea that they regretted having to impeach the president. But their actions told a different story. The Speaker of the House, the Speaker, distributed celebratory pins when she signed the articles of impeachment and then went on TV and celebrated the impeachment with a fist bump. Madam President, it doesn't require much work to imagine the damage that can be done to our republic if impeachment becomes a weapon to be used whenever a political party doesn't like a president. Pretty soon, presidents would be serving not at the pleasure of the American people, but at the pleasure of the House and the Senate. We need to call a halt before we've gone too far to turn back. Endorsing the House's rushed, partisan, and slipshod work would encourage future Houses to use impeachment for partisan purposes. Both parties need to learn that partisan impeachments are perilous. Finally, Madam President, I believe that except in the most extreme circumstances, it should be the American people and not Washington politicians who decide whether or not a president should be removed from office. Presidential primary voting, as we learned yesterday in Iowa, is already underway. We have a presidential election in November where the people of this country can weigh in and make their voices heard. I think we should leave the decision up to them. Indeed, given the deep divisions plaguing our country as reflected in the starkly different views about this impeachment, removing the president from office and from the ballots for the upcoming election would almost certainly plunge the country into even greater political turmoil. Madam President, I am deeply troubled by the events of the past few months. I've always believed that we can differ here in Congress while still respecting and working with those who disagree with us. But Democrats have increasingly sought to demonize anyone who doesn't share their obsession with impeaching this president. One of the House managers in this trial went so far as to suggest that any senator who voted against them was treacherous. And at one point, a senator asked whether the Chief Justice's constitutionally required participation in the trial was contributing to, quote, the loss of legitimacy of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and the Constitution, end quote, with the clear suggestion that the only way for the Supreme Court to maintain its legitimacy would be for it to agree with the Democratic Party. We've sunk pretty low when we've come to the point of suggesting that disagreement is unconstitutional. But for all this, Madam President, I remain hopeful. Congress has been through contentious times before, and we've gotten through them. There's no question that this partisan impeachment has been divisive. But I do believe we can move on from this. And I am ready to work with all of my colleagues, both Democrat and Republican, in the coming weeks and months as we get back to the business of the American people. And for the nation that we all love, I pray that that proves possible. Madam President, I yield the floor.
South Dakota Republican Senator John Thune. And now, Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican of Louisiana.
This is a re-air of C-SPAN radio programming from Tuesday.
Madam President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Madam President, the Senate must determine whether to remove a president duly elected by the people. A decision of such magnitude deserves, first, full consideration of the procedures, two, merits of the charges, and three, the ramifications removal would have on our republic. The framers of the Constitution granted the House of Representatives impeachment powers, yet cautioned against using that power unless absolutely necessary. Impeachment negates an election in which Americans choose their leader. If substantial numbers of Americans disagree with removing the president, removal damages civic society. It follows that the House should conduct thorough and complete investigations, even if time-consuming, before impeaching. A thorough investigation educates Americans that a president should be impeached and removed. Failing to convince the people invites anger towards, disdain for, and abandonment of the democratic process. The framers also required a 2/3 Senate majority for removal to prevent partisanship so that removal only occurs after the House convinces its own members, the Senate, and the American people. The Watergate investigation, for example, convinced Americans that President Nixon committed crimes, forcing his resignation with overwhelming support for removal in the House and the Senate. In the case against President Trump, the House declined to call witnesses it felt relevant, arguing that the courts would take too long and the president was an imminent threat to our republic. House managers blamed legal resistance from the administration of witnesses. For example, Dr. Charles Kupperman threatened to sue. A congressional committee afraid of being sued while claiming to be fearlessly pursuing truth for the good of the country rings hollow. It also rang hollow when Adam Schiff said that we could not wait for the next election for voters to decide President Trump's fate after Speaker Nancy Pelosi held the articles for 37 days. That decision smacks of partisan political motivations. The partisanship the founders warned against was reflected in the House vote, with the only bipartisan votes being against impeachment. House managers Schiff, Nadler, and Lofgren once said that party line impeachment would divide the nation. They never explained why their opinions changed. The role of the Senate, though, is to judge the House's evidence. House managers stated their case was overwhelming and compelling. Having not pursued further witness testimony in building their case, the House managers demanded the Senate call witnesses the House did not call. Additional witnesses, however, would not have changed material facts, but allowing the House to poorly develop a case, sacrificing thoroughness for political timing, would have forever changed the dynamic of the chambers respective to each's role in the impeachment process. Should the Senate acquiesce in this manipulation of the process, it welcomes the House to use impeachment as a political weapon, whatever the merits of its case. Now, I've been speaking of procedure. I want to emphasize procedure matters. Justice Frankfurter once wrote, "The history of liberty has largely been the history of the observance of procedural safeguards. If the appropriate use of impeachment is to be preserved, procedural safeguards must be observed." Moving now to charges. In Article 2, House managers argued the President obstructed Congress for acting on the advice of legal counsel to resist subpoenas. The judiciary resolves disputes between the executive and legislative branches. The House should have exhausted judicial remedies before bringing this charge. I shall vote against Article 2. In Article 1, abuse of power, 3 issues must be addressed. 1, the legal standard of guilt by which to judge the President. 2, whether the President committed a crime. And if so, 3, whether that crime warrants removal from office. First, the standard of guilt was never established. Legal standards for conviction vary from the lower, more probable than not threshold, to the higher, which is beyond a reasonable doubt, which is used in criminal cases. Since House managers charged, quote, something akin to a crime, beyond a reasonable doubt seems most appropriate, the higher threshold. And as Senator Jay Rockefeller stated during President Clinton's impeachment, beyond a reasonable doubt means that it is proven to a moral certainty that the case is clear, that the case is concise. Second, House managers allege that the President held military aid to Ukraine to leverage an investigation into former Vice President Biden as a quid pro quo, although they did not charge President Trump with the crime of requiring a quid pro quo or of bribery. The President's defense team cast reasonable doubt on this allegation. For example, regarding the July 25th phone call, which was reported by the whistleblower and which triggered the House impeachment proceedings, the President raised the issue of corruption in Ukraine. President Trump has always been skeptical of foreign aid, and especially when he thinks it is wasted. Hunter Biden was mentioned, but no connection was made with the release of aid to Ukraine. Other defense arguments included that Ambassador Kurt Volker denied a connection between aid and corruption investigations. President Zelensky and Ukrainian officials denied feeling pressured. President Trump denied a quid pro quo to Ambassador Sondland and told Senator Ron Johnson when asked if there was some sort of arrangement, quote, "No way, I would never do that." And both aid to Ukraine was released before the statutory deadline, and a meeting between Presidents Trump and Zelensky occurred without an announced investigation. It's also important to note that the release of aid on September the 11th followed new Ukrainian anti-corruption measures, which included swearing in a reformed parliament and installing a new prosecutor general August 29th, and the newly established High Anti-Corruption Court meeting for the first time September the 5th. Now, the third issue regarding Article 1, abuse of power, is that the term is a nebulous one which does not define a specific crime. Contrast this with the impeachment of President Nixon, when the House drafted an article of impeachment alleging abuse of power, but which enumerated 5 specific criminal and non-criminal offenses against President Nixon. The Constitution speaks of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Because high crimes and misdemeanors are not specifically defined, it is reasonable to assume that the framers meant for impeachment to occur only if a crime approached levels as severe as treason and bribery. Since the House managers allege President Trump committed something akin to a crime in deciding whether abuse of power is a high crime or misdemeanor, the prudent decision is to apply the principle of lenity. This principle, relied upon by Supreme Court Chief Justice Marshall and Justice Frankfurter, says that if a law is ambiguous, it is better to narrowly interpret the words of a law in favor of the defendant. Now, although the preceding discussion finds that the House managers failed to prove their case beyond a shadow of a doubt, failed to define the crime, thereby invoking the principle of lenity, it is still a question that if a crime was committed, was it an impeachable crime? In 1998, then Democratic Congressman Ed Markey argued that even though President Clinton, as chief law enforcement officer of the land, lied under oath, the crime was not impeachable. The Senate agreed, establishing the precedent that to remove a president, the crime must reach a high threshold of severity. The allegation against President Trump was not proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and it does not meet that high threshold. I shall vote against Article 1. I end by speaking of the ramifications for our republic. In 1998, then Congressman Chuck Schumer said of the Clinton impeachment, quote, "I suspect history will show that we have lowered the bar on impeachment so much, we have broken the seal on this extreme penalty so cavalierly that it will be used as a routine tool to fight political battles. My fear is that when a Republican wins the White House, Democrats will demand payback." Mr. Schumer was a prophet. This must stop. With that, I yield.
Louisiana Republican Senator Bill Cassidy on the floor of the Senate as the Senate continues to deliberate the 2 impeachment articles. Senators are taking to the floor to explain their positions and to say how they'll vote. Each senator has been allotted 10 minutes. We continue now with Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa, a Republican.
Madam President. Senator from Iowa.
Madam President, I want to first thank the House managers and the Council for the President for their time, their hard work, and patience these past few weeks. Yes, folks, we have had a robust and at times a rancorous trial. Some days I left here feeling angry, and some days I left more hopeful. Frankly, it is likely that many Americans, and in my case, Iowans, from every political stripe, will feel hurt by this process at some level. But we are all representatives of the ideals and beliefs of the people we are here to represent. Like all of you, I have sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution, and I take that oath very seriously. There have been a lot of arguments presented about what the Constitution says regarding the threshold for impeaching a president. It's clear to me that the Constitution goes out of its way to make it a high bar for removing the president. This is because the founders were rightfully concerned that impeachment might be used to upend the electoral will of the American people. Absent restraint, the impeachment process would be all too tempting for those that oppose a sitting president to simply use it as a tool to achieve political advantage. Each of us had one job during this process to decide, based on the evidence, whether the president committed an impeachable offense. Upon reviewing the record containing the testimony of 17 witnesses and over 28,000 pages, as well as hearing from both sides on their arguments presented throughout this process, I will vote against both articles of impeachment. The arguments of the House manager simply did not demonstrate that the president's actions rise to an impeachable offense. Given the constitutional requirements, voting any other way on these articles would remove the ability of the American people to make their own decision at the ballot box in November. This process was fraught from the start with political aims and partisan innuendos that simply cannot be overlooked. The House manager's arguments have argued that the American people cannot be trusted to render their own judgment on this president. I reject this premise and the complete distrust of the American people with everything in my heart. To do this would set a new and dangerous precedent in American history. As we sit here today, we believe we are experiencing a unique and historical event. However, if the case presented by the House of Representatives is allowed to be the basis for the removal of this president, I'm afraid that impeachment will become just another tool used by those who play partisan politics. This is not what the founders intended, and this is a very dark path to go down. Under the Constitution, impeachment wasn't designed to be a litmus test on every action of the president. Elections were designed to be that check. Further, the issue of foreign affairs has historically been fraught with peril for presidents. Foreign affairs is an art, not a science, and trying to insert a formula into every presidential interaction with a foreign leader is a path towards ineffectiveness. The Senate is about to close this chapter in American history. I pray that we do not allow this to become the norm. I also pray earnestly that we will shift into a spirit of cohesiveness, coming together to get our work done for the American people. Our people, our founders, our country, and my great state of Iowa deserve better than this. Thank you, and I yield the floor.
Republican Senator Joni Ernst. Senators continue to speak on the Senate floor about their positions on impeachment ahead of Wednesday's 4 p.m. vote on the 2 articles of impeachment. You're listening to C-SPAN Radio. We continue now with Senator Roger Wicker, Republican of Mississippi.
Senator from the great state of Mississippi.
Thank you, Madam President. Tomorrow I will cast my vote against the removal of our duly elected president. I will do so based upon my understanding of the duty conferred upon me by the Constitution of the United States. I do not believe the House managers have proved the allegations contained in the articles of impeachment, nor do I believe the articles allege conduct that may be used for grounds of removal. I find the President's counsel to be persuasive in this regard. Significantly, much of the American public, without the benefit of learned constitutional instruction, have come to the same conclusion. During the 2.5 weeks of this trial, we have received more than 28,000 pages of documents. We've seen 192 video clips of 13 different witnesses. We had the opportunity to question each side for a total of 16 hours, and we have listened to literally hours and hours of argument. Clearly, I'm unable to discuss every aspect of the trial in the time allotted me. Some facts in this case are in dispute, but many are not. Here's what we all know beyond a doubt. First, we know that voices on the left have been calling for the impeachment of Donald Trump since day one, literally day one. The Washington Post on January 20th, 2017 published an article titled, "The Campaign to Impeach President Trump Has Begun," on Inauguration Day. Secondly, we know that the years-long $32 million Mueller investigation failed to reveal sufficient ammunition for those who desired impeachment. Third, the impeachment of this president in the House was the result of a narrowly partisan vote, with no Republican representatives, 0 voting in favor of the articles. And fourth, a guilty verdict this week would not only immediately remove the president from office, but it would also remove his name from the ballot in an election which is already going on, the first caucuses of which were conducted only yesterday. The words are right there in Articles 1 and 2 on pages 3 and 4 of the resolution. Disqualification to hold any office. The founders of this country entrusted Congress with the power of impeachment as a check and balance on the executive branch. This power was never intended to settle policy differences or political disagreements, even intense disagreements. It was not designed so that Congress could get rid of a president they found odious or obnoxious or with whom they vehemently disagreed. The Constitution gives Congress this extraordinary authority as a remedy only for what it calls high crimes and misdemeanors. And making it clear what an extreme action impeachment is, the framers required the support of 2/3 in this chamber in order to convict. These standards intentionally set a very high bar to prevent abuse of the impeachment process. Meeting these standards requires this process be used to try only the most serious allegations and requires broad consensus in the Senate. Members of both parties have in the past warned about the dangers of a narrowly partisan impeachment. As late as last year, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi cautioned, impeachment is so divisive to the country that unless there's something so compelling and overwhelming and bipartisan, I don't think we should go down that path because it divides the country. Congressman Nadler, one of the impeachment managers, said in 1998, there must never be a narrowly voted impeachment or an impeachment substantially supported by one of our major political parties and largely opposed by the other. Such an impeachment would lack legitimacy, would produce divisiveness and bitterness in our politics for years to come. This wide approach has been supported in the past by House Manager Zoe Lofgren, by Senator and future Vice President Joe Biden, by our own colleagues, Senator Menendez and Schumer, who feared that impeachment would become a routine tool. These leaders had good company in taking this position. In Federalist number 65, Alexander Hamilton warned of the danger that the decision to impeach will be regulated more by the comparative strength of the parties than by the real demonstrations of innocence or guilt. Many of our Democratic friends who once sided with Hamilton have apparently changed their minds. They've also reversed themselves on the urgency of doing so. A rather sudden and abrupt change of heart on that question. House advocates of impeachment have argued that President Trump is willing to cheat in the ongoing election, amounting to such an imminent threat to our democracy that he must be removed at once. Unless he's out of office and out quickly, they assert, we cannot have any confidence that the 2020 election results will be trustworthy. I ask, Madam President, does any senator really believe that? That America cannot have a fair election if Donald Trump is in the White House? But that alleged danger was the reason for the abbreviated House procedure. The lead House manager, Congressman Schiff, said in an interview last year that the timing of impeachment was driven by the urgency of removing the president. Congressman Nadler agreed, saying nothing could be more urgent. Speaker Pelosi repeated the same argument many times to explain the rushed process in the House and why there was not time to give the president a fair hearing. Senators heard the words repeated and repeated on video clips shown during this trial. Urgent. Urgency. But what happened to that urgency once the House voted? Did the Speaker then rush the papers to the Senate so we could address this imminent threat? Hardly. Speaker Pelosi held the articles for more than a month. If this trial was so urgent, why not send the articles without delay? Some might conclude that by withholding the articles, the Speaker exposed that she did not in fact believe that this case was so urgent. Perhaps it was an effort to influence our procedural decisions. Madam President, I do not impugn motives here. Our rules prohibit me from doing so. I merely note an obvious change for whatever reason. As I consider the high bar of impeachment tomorrow, I will vote not to convict. I will do so because there's not overwhelming evidence, because no high crimes are shown, because there's not a broad consensus among my countrymen, only articles passed on a narrowly partisan basis, and because removing President Trump on these charges at this time would set a dangerous precedent. I conclude by reminding my colleagues we are the trustees of the Constitution of 1787. We have the privilege and responsibility of standing on the shoulders of our remarkably perceptive founders. But we also act as trustees for our republic on behalf of future generations. With that in mind, we have an enhanced obligation to be careful, to resist the passions of the moment, to remember that what we do today establishes precedents for decades and centuries to come. Manager Schiff closed his remarks yesterday with an ominous reference to nefarious midnight decisions, somehow threatening the freedom or welfare of Americans. His hopeful conclusion was that it is midnight in America, but the sun will rise tomorrow, a sentiment I happen to share, though my concept of what amounts to a beautiful sunrise may differ from his. Over a century ago, during the depths of World War I, Vachel Lindsay composed Abraham Lincoln Walks at Midnight. Imagining an agonized, sleepless Lincoln walking the streets of Springfield, dismayed over the carnage in Europe. Let us ask ourselves today, do Hamilton and Madison and Franklin walk these venerable halls at midnight? Do these founding fathers traverse the stone corridors of this great building, this symbol of stability and rule of law? If they do, they caution us, as they always have, to be careful, to avoid rash decisions, to resist the urges of partisanship, to let the Constitution work. I hope my colleagues will heed their counsel. And I yield the floor.
Republican Senator Roger Wicker. As the Senate continues to deliberate the two articles of impeachment, senators are taking to the floor to explain their positions and to say how they'll vote. We take you now to remarks by Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut.
Madam President, as we think back over these last weeks when we have sat together on the floor considering evidence and sitting in judgment as jurors and judges, spending countless hours deliberating. I often think about what I will remember from these days on a very personal level. It has been an historic event, but in some ways the human element strikes me as the most memorable. I will remember vividly the bravery of dedicated public servants who had everything to lose and nothing to gain by telling the American people the truth about Donald Trump and his scheme to corruptly use power for his personal benefit. Their courage, their grace under pressure, their dignity and unshakable honesty should be a model for all of us. I will remember, for example, Colonel Alexander Vindman, whose video appeared before us, a man who was brought to the United States at the age of 3 and grew to love this country so much that he put his life at risk in combat and then his career at risk by coming before the Congress. I'll remember Fiona Hill, daughter of a coal miner and nurse, who proceeded to get a PhD, swear an oath to this country, serving in both Republican and Democratic administrations, warning us not to peddle the, quote, fictional narrative, end quote, perpetrated and propagated, as she said, and I'm quoting, by the Russian security services themselves about this supposed Ukrainian effort to meddle in our elections. I will remember very vividly Ambassador William Taylor, a West Point graduate, decorated Vietnam War veteran, who testified that he thought it was, quote, crazy to, quote, withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign, end quote. And I will remember the whistleblower who came forward to express shock and alarm that the President of the United States would attempt to extort a vulnerable, fledgling democracy to help him cheat in the next election in exchange for the foreign military aid they so desperately needed to fight their adversary, Russia, our adversary, Russia, attacking and killing their young men and women. I have met some of those young men and women who came to Connecticut to the Burns Center at Bridgeport Hospital, so badly injured they could barely talk. And the stories of their suffering and hardship came back to me as I sat on the floor here. And their courage and their bravery and strength also will stay with me. I'll remember the moment that we raised our hands, took an oath to be impartial. All 100 of us, 99, at the same time in a historic moment when the weight of that responsibility shook me like a rock. And I will remember also the shame and sadness that I felt when this body, supposedly the greatest deliberative body in the history of the world, voted to close its eyes, to put on blinders to evidence, witnesses, and documents, first-hand knowledge, eyes and ears on the president, black and white, documents don't lie, that were necessary to understand the complete story and give the American people the complete truth.
Connecticut Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal on the floor of the Senate on C-SPAN Radio, WCSP-FM, Washington.
This is a re-air of C-SPAN Radio programming from Tuesday.
That moment, unfortunately, a moment of dismay and disappointment, will stay with me as well after aspiring for so long to be part of this body, which I respected and revered. So utterly failing the American people at this moment of crisis. And I will remember the audible gasp, some laughs, raised eyebrows in this chamber when Professor Alan Dershowitz made the incredible, shocking argument that a president who believes that his own reelection serves the public interest can do anything he wants, and his actions are not impeachable. The implications of that argument for the future of our democracy are simply indescribable. Now, I've been a trial lawyer. I've spent most of my career in and out of the courtroom, so I can argue the legalities. But I'm not here to rehash the legal arguments because culpability here seems pretty clear to me. The president solicited a bribe when he sought a personal benefit, an investigation of his political opponent, a smear of his rival, in exchange for an official act, in fact, two official acts, the release of military funding for an ally and a White House meeting in return for that personal benefit. Those actions are a violation of Section 201, 18 United States Code today. They were a violation of criminal law at the time of the framers, and that's why they put it in the Constitution. Bribery and treason specifically mentioned. Bribery is included as an abuse of power, as it was when Judge Proteus was convicted and impeached. And many of the members of this chamber voted to impeach him, although bribery was never mentioned in the articles charging him with abuse of power. The idea that bribery or any crime has to be mentioned for there to be an abuse of power is clearly preposterous. The elements of bribery have been proved, in my view, beyond a reasonable doubt, and there is no excuse for that criminal conduct. I'm going to submit a detailed statement for the record that makes the legal case, but clearly bribery has been committed by this president. What strikes me, perhaps looking beyond the legalities, as most telling here is the constant theme of secrecy. The fact that the president kept his reasons for withholding aid secret, unlike other suspensions of aid to other countries like the Northern Triangle in Central America or Egypt, where it was announced publicly and Congress was notified. Here, he kept it secret. He operated through his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, in secret, not through the State Department, not through the Department of Justice. Despite all his claims of corruption and wrongdoing by Hunter or Joe Biden, he either never went to the Department of Justice or they declined to investigate because there was no there. Instead, he sought secretly the investigation of political rival through a foreign government targeting a U.S. citizen secretly. His refusal to provide a single document to Congress, allow a single witness to testify, keeping their testimony and that evidence secret, concealing it, his defiance of every subpoena in court, effectively neutering Congress's oversight authority, our oversight authority to check any of these abuses, all of it for the purpose of secrecy. His claim of absolute immunity, totally discredited and rejected by the courts because, as the court said in McGann's case, he is not a king. His claim of executive privilege as the reason for keeping that evidence secret. Well, he never really invoked executive privilege. But executive privilege cannot be invoked to conceal criminal conduct that fits within the crime fraud exception.
Connecticut Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal.
And while the president's lawyers argued before this body that the House should have gone to court to enforce those subpoenas instead of resorting to the remedy of impeachment, they had then the audacity to simultaneously, at exactly the same time, argue in court that Congress cannot seek a judicial remedy to enforce subpoenas because it has the remedy of impeachment. No jurisdiction because of impeachment, and at the same time, no access to evidence necessary for impeachment because supposedly you can go to court. This duplicity is absolutely stunning. And I will say, just again on a personal note as a prosecutor, it's a dead giveaway. He's guilty. Regardless of what we do tomorrow, we know for sure in this great democracy the truth will come out. It always does. It's just a question of when. It comes out about all of us at some point. And for this president, the truth is coming out in real time as we speak on this floor, as we vote tomorrow. The revelations in the New York Times about what John Bolton has written in his book indicate the truth is going to come out in mid-March with John Bolton's book, assuming the president doesn't try to censor it and tie him up in court or exercise some prior restraint. It will come out in congressional investigations when John Bolton and others testify. It will come out because there are courageous men and women like Ambassador Taylor and Fiona Hill and Colonel Vindman and others who are willing to put country ahead of their personal careers. When my children grow up, and they are pretty well grown, I hope they will be more like them than like the president. And I never, ever thought I would say that in the Senate of the United States, let alone anywhere. Because this president has shown that he will take advantage of every opportunity for self-enrichment and self-aggrandizement. Whether it's violating the Emoluments Clause, and I have sued him along with 199 of my colleagues on that issue, making money from the presidency, profiting and putting profit ahead of his official duties, or seeking to smear a political rival and soliciting a bribe, even if the aid went through and even if the investigation was never announced, it's still a crime. Putting that kind of self-benefit ahead of his duty to the country and our national security, the welfare and fight of an ally at the tip of the spear against a common adversary who is seeking to destroy Western democracies. He is someone who has said, show me the boundaries of the law and I'll push them. And if I can successfully cross them, I will do it again. And he will do it again. Everyone in this chamber knows it. So as we make this momentous decision, I implore each of my colleagues to think about the gravity of what we will do if we fail to convict this president. The message that we send to countries struggling to overcome corruption. Because America is more than just a country. America is an idea and an ideal. When we implore them to fight corruption, our credibility is shredded when we condone it at home. The framers, in their wisdom, knew that elections every 4 years were an inadequate check against any president who corruptly abuses power for personal gain. And this situation and this president is exactly what they feared when our young infant country was struggling to avoid foreign interference in our election. It was their worst nightmare. Foreign interference, the threat of foreign meddling, exactly what this president has invited. It was Delegate William Davey of North Carolina who said, quote, "If he be not impeachable whilst in office, he will spare no efforts or means whatever to get himself re-elected." It was precisely cheating in a future election, foreign interference in our domestic affairs, that the framers established impeachment to prevent. That's why the remedy exists, and that's why we must use it now. History will judge us harshly if we fail in this historic challenge. History will haunt the colleagues who fail to meet this challenge, who lack the courage that was demonstrated by those heroes. Taylor, Vindman, Hill, Cooper, others. And they will continue to serve our country. And the truth will come out. The heroes of the Stark era will be our independent judiciary and our free press. They will continue uncovering the truth. They will continue providing freedom of information material under the law. They will continue to protect civil rights and civil liberties. They will continue their vigilance, even if we fail in ours. But we have this task now. History will sit in judgment of us, and the future of our republic will be in jeopardy if we fail tomorrow to do the right thing. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Connecticut Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal on the floor of the Senate as senators continue to share their thoughts on the two articles of impeachment ahead of a vote on Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll have coverage of that vote, and you can always watch the Senate live on C-SPAN 2, gavel to gavel. We continue now and hear from Maryland Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen.
From Maryland is recognized.
Madam President, it is the constitutional duty of each senator to weigh the evidence before us and render a final verdict on the two articles of impeachment. On the charge of abuse of power, the House managers have presented overwhelming evidence, a, quote, mountain of it, as Senator Alexander has conceded. For anyone with eyes to see or ears to hear, President Trump undoubtedly used the power of the presidency to withhold vital taxpayer-funded military aid from Ukraine, to extort its government into helping him in his re-election campaign. He did so even though fighting Russian aggression is in our national interest. And make no mistake, the fact that he got caught before his scheme succeeded is no defense. The House has also approved its case on the charge of obstruction of Congress. President Trump has engaged in unprecedented stonewalling, a blanket cover-up that makes President Nixon look like an amateur. Not a single document produced, nor a single witness. Those who did testify did so despite the president's order not to show up. They raised their right hands and swore to tell the truth. They included Trump political appointees and a major donor to his campaign, individuals who served our country in war, dedicated public servants who took an oath to defend the Constitution. Dismissing them as anti-Trumpers and Democratic witnesses is wrong, as were the president's attempts to bully and intimidate them. With the facts proven, the Senate must now ask, do these charges meet the standard for impeachment? The president claims impeachment requires charging him with a statutory crime. But that is a fringe view with patently absurd results. Their lead lawyer making this argument, Alan Dershowitz, did not hold this view during the Clinton impeachment. Nor does Trump's Attorney General, William Barr. Nor does Jonathan Turley, Trump's constitutional law expert at the House Judiciary Committee hearing. Nor does the authority cited by the President's own lawyers here in the Senate and referenced 9 times in their legal briefs. That authority, entitled Impeachment, a Handbook, states, and I quote, "The limitation of impeachable offenses to those offenses made generally criminal by statute is unwarranted, even absurd," unquote. This suggested standard has been roundly dismissed because it leads to ridiculous conclusions. For example, that a president could withhold taxpayer-funded disaster assistance to the people of a state until their governor endorsed the president for re-election. Even Alan Dershowitz recognized the folly of his own argument, so he switched to saying impeachment requires criminal-like conduct. Well, the president's actions here have all the markings of criminal-like conduct, including what the founders would consider bribery and extortion. Moreover, as made clear by the nonpartisan legal opinion I requested from the GAO, the president and his team broke the impoundment control law as part of his overall extortion scheme. In fact, the toxic mix of misconduct we find here, a president corruptly using his office in a manner that compromises our national security to get a foreign government to help him stay in power, is exactly the kind of abuse of power our founders most feared. Yet the president shows no sign of remorse or regret. His refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing is an ongoing threat to our country and our Constitution. Even as this impeachment process has proceeded, he has continued to solicit other countries, including China, to help his re-election efforts. As he says, the Constitution gives him, and I quote, "the right to do whatever I want as president," unquote. Let's be honest. President Trump sees the Constitution not as a check on his powers, but as a blank check to abuse power, and he won't change. His ongoing betrayal of the oath of office represents a clear and present danger to our Constitution, our democracy, and the rule of law. Those who argue we must not remove the president before the next election ignore the fact that the founders included an impeachment clause in the same Constitution that establishes 4-year terms for the president. And they wrote the impeachment clause for exactly this moment, to prevent a corrupt president from enlisting a foreign power to help him cheat in an election. President Trump has committed high crimes and misdemeanors against the Constitution, and we must use the founders' remedy. We must find him guilty and remove him from office. Failure to convict will send a terrible signal that this president and any future president can commit crimes against the Constitution and the American people and get away with it. But it is not only the president who has violated his duty under the Constitution. So too has this Senate. Not because of the ultimate conclusion expected tomorrow, but because of the flawed way the Senate will reach that decision. While I strongly disagree with acquittal, that verdict might be accepted by most Americans if reached through a real and a fair trial. But this Senate did not hold a real trial. It held the first impeachment proceeding in our history not to call a single witness or seek a single document. President Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton, offered us important information about the charges against the president. The Senate voted not to hear from him. President Trump said he wanted his acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, to testify at the Senate trial. But then he changed his mind, and Senate Republicans voted not to hear from him. I offered to have the Chief Justice make decisions about relevant witnesses and documents, just as impartial judges do in trials every day across America. In fact, unlike in every other courtroom, It preserved the right of the Senate to overturn the Chief Justice's decision by a majority vote. That is obviously a fair process for the President, but every Republican senator voted against it. And why? Because they're afraid of getting to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. They know that as more incriminating facts come out, it becomes harder to acquit. And by joining the President's cover-up, they have become his accomplices. While the decision on the President will come tomorrow, the verdict on this Senate is already in. Guilty. Guilty of dereliction of its constitutional duty to conduct an impartial trial. And because the trial was a farce, the final result will be seen by most of the country as illegitimate, the product of a tainted trial. And President Trump must understand this. There is no exoneration, no vindication, no real acquittal from a fake trial. In failing to adhere to the principles of our Constitution and the values of our country, I fear we have done grievous injury to the nature of our democracy. I only hope America will find the resilience to repair the damage in the years to come. Madam President, I yield the remainder of my time.
Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. You're listening to C-SPAN Radio. Next, we hear from Gary Peters, Democrat of Michigan.
Madam President, I swore an oath to defend the Constitution, both as an officer in the United States Navy Reserve and as a United States Senator. And at the beginning of this impeachment trial, I swore an oath to keep an open mind, listen carefully to the facts, and in the end, deliver impartial justice. After carefully listening to the arguments presented by both House managers and the President's lawyers, I believe the facts are clear. President Trump stands accused by the House of Representatives of abusing his power in an attempt to extort a foreign government to announce a trumped-up investigation into a political rival and thereby put his personal interest ahead of national security and the public trust. The President illegally withheld congressionally approved military aid to an ally at war with Russia and conditioned its release on Ukraine making an announcement the President could use to falsely discredit a likely political opponent. When the President's corrupt plan was brought to light, the White House engaged in a systematic and unprecedented effort to cover up the scheme. The President's complete refusal to cooperate with a constitutionally authorized investigation is unparalleled in American history. Despite the extraordinary efforts by the President to cover up the facts, the House managers made a convincing case. It is clear the President's actions were not an effort to further official American foreign policy. The President was not working in the public interest. What the President did was wrong, unacceptable, and impeachable. I expected the President's lawyers to offer new eyewitness testimony from people with firsthand knowledge and offer new documents to defend the President. But that did not happen. It became very clear to me that the President's closest advisors could not speak to the President's innocence, and his lawyers did everything in their power to prevent them from testifying under oath. No one in this country is above the law. No one. Not even the President. If someone is accused of a crime and they have witnesses that could clear them of any wrongdoing, they would want those witnesses to testify. In fact, not only would they welcome it, they would insist on it. All we need to do is use some common sense. The fact that the President refuses to have his closest advisors testify tells me that he is afraid of what they will say. The President's conduct is unacceptable for any official, let alone the leader of our country. Our nation's founders feared unchecked and unlimited power by the President. They rebelled against an abusive monarch with unlimited power and instead created a republic that distributed power across different branches of government. They were careful students of history. They knew unchecked power would destroy a democratic republic. They were especially fearful of unchecked executive and specifically granted Congress the power of impeachment to check a president who thought of themselves as above the law. 2 years ago, I had the privilege of participating in an annual bipartisan Senate tradition, reading President George Washington's farewell address to the Senate. In that address, President Washington warned that unchecked power, the rise of partisan factions, and foreign influence, if left unchecked, would undermine our young nation and allow for the rise of a demagogue. He warned that we could become so divided and so entrenched in the beliefs of our particular partisan group that, quote, and I quote, cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reign of government. I am struck by the contrast of where we are today and where our founders were more than 200 years ago. George Washington was the ultimate rock star of his time. He was beloved, and when he announced he would leave the presidency and return to Mount Vernon, people begged him to stay. There was a call to make him a king, and he said no. He reminded folks that he had just fought against a monarch so that the American people could enjoy the liberties of a free people. George Washington, a man of integrity and an American hero, refused to be anointed king when it was offered to him by his adoring countrymen. He chose a republic over a monarchy. But tomorrow, by refusing to hold President Trump accountable for his abuses, Republicans in the Senate are offering him unbridled power without accountability, and he will gleefully seize that power. And when he does, our republic will face an existential threat. A vote against the articles of impeachment will set a dangerous precedent and will be used by future presidents to act with impunity. Given what we know, that the president abused his power in office by attempting to extort a foreign government to interfere with an American election, that he willfully obstructed justice at every turn, and that his actions run counter to our nation's most cherished and fundamental values, it is clear the president betrayed the trust of the American public placed in him to fully execute his constitutional responsibilities. This betrayal is by definition a high crime and misdemeanor. If it does not rise to the level of impeachment and removal, I am not sure what would. The Senate has a constitutional responsibility to hold him accountable. If we do not stand up and defend our democracy during this fragile period, we will be allowing the president and future presidents to have unchecked power. This is not what our founders intended. The oath I swore to protect and defend the Constitution demands that I vote to preserve the future of our republic. I will faithfully execute my oath and vote to hold this president accountable for his actions. Madam President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Michigan Democratic Senator Gary Peters on the floor of the Senate on Tuesday.
This is a re-air of C-SPAN radio programming from Tuesday.
On Wednesday, February 5th, the Senate will convene at 4 p.m. as a court of impeachment. This will be the 13th and final day of the court of impeachment. They will conduct roll call votes on the two articles of impeachment, Article 1, abuse of power, and Article 2, obstruction of Congress. We take you back to the floor on Monday and hear the remarks from Senator Chuck Grassley, a Republican of Iowa.
As senators, we cast many votes during our time here. I've cast over 13,200. Each one of those votes is important, but a vote to convict or acquit the president on charges of impeachment is perhaps the most important vote a senator could ever cast. Until now, it's happened only twice in our nation's history, and it's something that should never be taken lightly. Now, President Trump has been charged of committing, according to the Constitution and in these articles, high crimes and misdemeanors for requesting a foreign leader investigating his potential political opponent, and number two, obstructing Congress's inquiry into those actions. For this, we're asking to permanently remove him from office. As a judge and juror, as we all are, I first ask whether the charges rise to an offense that unquestionably demands removal from office. If so, I then ask whether the House proved beyond a reasonable doubt that it actually occurred. The House's case fails on the first of those questions. The President's request is not impeachable conduct under our Constitution. A President isn't prohibited by law from engaging the assistance of a foreign ally in an anti-corruption investigation. The House tries to make up for this hurdle by suggesting that subjective motive, in other words, political advantage, can turn on an otherwise unimpeachable act into an act that demands removal from office. I won't support such an irreversible break from the Constitution's standard for impeaching a president. The Senate is an institution of precedent. We're informed and guided by history and the actions of our predecessors. But our choices also actually make history. These days, that can be difficult to keep in mind. A rush to convict or acquit can lead to cut corners and overheated rhetoric. We're each bound by our oath to do impartial justice. As President pro tempore of this institution, I recognize that we must also do justice to the Senate and to the Republic that this Senate serves. This trial began with full and fair debate on the rules to guide our process. We considered and voted on 11 amendments over nearly 13 hours. Consistent with precedent, the Senate adopted rules allowing the same length of time for arguments and questions as was agreed to unanimously in 1999 Clinton impeachment. Consistent with precedent, we engaged in a robust debate on calling witnesses and pursuing additional evidence. We sat as a court of impeachment for over 70 hours. The final vote will be the product of a fair and judicious process consistent with precedent of the Senate. I cannot say the same of the articles of impeachment that we're considering today from the House of Representatives, which has the sole power of impeachment. After 9 days of presentation and questions, and after fully considering the record, I'm convinced that what the House is asking the Senate to do is constitutionally flawed and dangerously unprecedented. The House's abuse of power article rests on objectively legal conduct. Until Congress legislate otherwise, a president is within his authority to request that a foreign leader assist with anti-corruption efforts. To make up for this, the House of Representatives' abuse of power theory rests entirely on the president's subjective motive. This very vague standard cannot be sustained. The House offers no limiting principle of what motives are allowed. So, under such a flexible standard, future House of Representatives could impeach presidents for taking lawful action for what a majority thinks are the wrong reasons. The House also gives no guidance whatsoever on whether conviction rests on proving a single correct motive or whether mixed motive suffices under their theory. In its trial brief, the House of Representatives argues there's no credible alternative explanation, that's their words, for the President's alleged conduct. But once the Senate heard from the President's counsel in defense, then all of a sudden, the House changed its tunes. Now, even a credible alternative explanation shouldn't stop the Senate from removing the President. Reshaping their own standard mid-trial only serves to undercut their initial arguments. And simply asserting, at least 63 times that I counted, that their evidence was quote-unquote overwhelming doesn't make the House of Representatives' allegations accurate or prove an impeachable offense. Even after arguments had concluded, the House managers started repeating the terms bribery and extortion on the floor of the Senate, while neither terms appears anywhere in their articles of impeachment. So you get down to this point. It's not the Senate's job to read into House articles what the House failed or didn't see fit to incorporate itself. Articles of impeachment shouldn't be moving targets, like moving a goalpost. The ambiguities surrounding the House's abuse of power theory give this senator reason enough to vote not guilty. If we're to lower the bar of impeachment, and that's what the House of Representatives is trying to do, we better be clear on where the bar is being set. Now, the House's second article, impeaching the President for what they call obstruction of Congress, is equally unprecedented and equally patently frivolous. This senator takes great pride in knowing a thing or two about obstruction by the executive branch from both Republican presidents and Democrat presidents in the 40 years that I've been doing oversight. Congressional oversight, like rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse, is central to my role as a senator representing Iowa taxpayers. In the face of obstruction, I use the tools the Constitution provides to this institution. Now, that is the very core of the checks and balances of our governmental system.
Republican Senator Chuck Grassley from Monday.
I fought the Obama administration to obtain documents related to Operation Fast and Furious under the House's obstruction standard. Should President Obama have been impeached for his failure to waive privileges during the course of that investigation? We fought President Obama on this for 3 years in the courts, and we still didn't end up with all that we asked for. Now, we never heard a peep from the Democrats when Obama pulled that trick. So the hypocrisy here by the House Democrats is on full display for the last 2 weeks. In the case before us, the House issued a series of requests and subpoenas to the executive branch, but the House failed to enforce those requests. When challenged to stand up for its subpoena in court, the investigating committee simply retreated. The House may cower at defending its own authority, but the Senate shouldn't have to clean up the mess of the House's own making. for the many ways in which the House failed in the fundamentals of oversight, and for the terrible new precedent this obstruction article would set, I'll vote not guilty. Another point, there's been debate about the whistleblowers whose complaint motivated the House's impeachment inquiry. I've worked for and with whistleblowers for more than 30 years. I sponsored numerous laws to strengthen whistleblower protections. Attempts by anyone to out a whistleblower just to sell an article or score a political point, those are not helpful at all. It's not the treatment any whistleblower deserves. However, it's important for investigators to talk to whistleblowers, to evaluate their claims and credibility, because those claims form the basis of an inquiry under checks and balances of government. My office does this all the time. When whistleblowers bring a significant case of bipartisan interest, we frequently work closely with Democrats to look into those claims. I know the House committees have followed that course in the past. Both parties understand how to talk to whistleblowers and respect confidentiality. But why no efforts were taken in this case to take these very basic bipartisan steps is very baffling to me. I fear that to achieve its desired goal, the House majority weaponized and politicized whistleblowers for purely partisan purposes. I hope that the damage done will be short-lived. Otherwise, separation of powers under our Constitution will be weakened. Finally, I've always made it a priority to hold judicial nominees to a standard of restraint and fidelity to the law. And as judges in this case, which every senator is, we should consider those factors which counsel restraint. These articles came to the Senate as a product of a flawed, unprecedented, and partisan process. When the articles were voted by the full House, the only bipartisanship was those in opposition. Moreover, tonight, the Iowa caucuses will be finished. The 2020 presidential election is underway. Yet, we all are asked to remove the incumbent from the ballot based on an impeachment supported by only one party of the Congress. The Senate should take no part in endorsing the very dangerous new precedent that this would set for future impeachments. We know we need no new normal when it comes to impeaching a president. We've got precedents of the past that should be followed, and they haven't been followed. We've had more than 28 pages of evidence. We've had 17 witnesses and over 70 hours of open, transparent consideration by the Senate. The American people are more than adequately prepared to decide for themselves the fate of the president in November. This decision belongs to the voters. It's time to get the Senate back to work for the American people on issues of substance. I yield the floor.
Republican Senator Chuck Grassley from Monday. We take you now to the floor of the Senate, where Sheldon Whitehouse, a Democrat of Rhode Island, is speaking as senators share their thoughts and how they will vote on the articles of impeachment. The vote's scheduled for Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Senators each have 10 minutes to make their speeches.
Well, here we are. The impeachment outcome is settled, as it was from day one. In my view, the facts are clear, the conduct impeachable, and the obstruction unprecedented. In my view, this impeachment process ran into a partisan wall. And the Senate's part was to deny the American people the most basic elements of a fair trial, witnesses and evidence. Alexander Hamilton years ago warned us of what he called the greatest danger in impeachments. Quote, that the decision will be regulated more by the comparative strength of parties than by the real demonstrations of innocence or guilt, end quote. In my view, that danger has met us. As a boy, I often sang a hymn with the stanza that to every man and nation comes a moment to decide in the strife of truth with falsehood for the good or evil side. In my view, the Senate chose the wrong side. We are obviously going to disagree about a lot here, so let me focus on two thoughts that perhaps we can agree on. One is that what we have done here should carry little weight as precedent. Politics cast very long shadows over this proceeding. This was not our finest hour by any stretch, and much of what was said and done here should not be repeated, let alone treated as precedent. I hope history treats this episode as an aberration, not a precedent. Too many things that are right and proper had to be bent or broken to get to the preordained result. And too much of what was said by White House counsel was not only wrong, but disgraceful. The presentation in this chamber by White House counsel was characterized by smarminess, smear, elision, outright misstatement, and various dishonest rhetorical tricks that I doubt they would dare pull before judges. Knowing that we were a captive and silent audience, knowing the outcome was predetermined in their favor, and grandstanding for a TV audience, particularly an audience of one, they delivered a performance that leaves a stain on the pages of the Senate record. Perhaps there will be consequences for some of their conduct in our chamber. I ask that my further remarks on this subject be attached as an appendix to this statement.
Without objection.
So enough of my professional disgust with their performance, but let us agree that this ought not be precedent. Let us also agree on something else. There is one particular argument the White House made that we should trample, discard, and put out into the trash. The notion that a United States District Court can supervise our Senate impeachment proceeding. I truly hope we can agree on this. As a court of impeachment, we are constituted at the Founders' command. The Chief Justice presided in that seat at the Founders' command. We convened as a body at the Founders' command. And at the Founders' command, the Senate has the sole power to try all impeachments. Every signal from the Constitution directs that we try impeachments. And no part of the Senate's power to do so is conferred anywhere else in the government. It's on us. The President's counsel proposed that they may interrupt the Senate's trial of impeachment, delay the Senate's trial of impeachment in order to go down the street to the United States District Court to litigate our trial determinations about evidence and privilege, determinations in our proceeding. There are three arguments against that proposition. The most obvious one is the Constitution. The Constitution puts the trial in the hands of the Senate, sitting as a court of impeachment, and makes no mention of any role for any court to supervise or pass on the Senate's conduct of this trial. It is simply not in the Constitution. The second argument is the improbability that the founders would convene the United States Senate as a court of impeachment. Bring the managers of the United States House of Representatives over here to present their charges. Put the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court into that chair to preside over the trial. Give the Senate the sole power to try the impeachment, and then allow a defendant to run down the street to a district judge and interrupt the proceedings? That idea is contrary to common sense as well as constitutional order. The impeachment provisions of the Constitution were adopted by the founders in September of 1787, after that long, hot summer in Philadelphia, and ratified with the Constitution in 1788. The Judiciary Act establishing lower courts did not pass until 1789. It is hard to imagine that the founders meant the proceedings and determinations of our Senate Court of Impeachment to be subject to the oversight of a judge down the road from us whose office did not even exist at the time. The founders in the Constitution put this squarely on us. No one else is mentioned. It is our sole power. It is the duty of the Chief Justice under the Constitution to preside over this trial. It is his duty to make appropriate rulings, and it is on us to live with that, unless, as we may, we choose to overrule the Chief Justice as a body by recorded vote and live with that. We run this trial. The senators, the Senate, no one else. We are responsible to the people of the United States to run this trial. We were trusted by the founders to live up to those responsibilities. When we sit as a court of impeachment, it is all on us. The founders put it squarely on us. And we took that job when we took our oaths. That means we control the trial rulings, the timing, the evidence determinations, and the privileges we will accept. We can accept the rulings of the Chief Justice, or we can reverse them, but it's our job. Previous impeachments record the Senate making just such rulings. Never has the Senate referred such a ruling to a court. Indeed, in Walter Nixon v. United States, reported at 506 U.S. 224, a 1993 decision, the Supreme Court held that federal courts have no power to review procedures used by the Senate in trying impeachments, that it was a non-justiciable political question, and that, to quote the decision, the judiciary and the Supreme Court in particular were not chosen to have any role in impeachments. The Supreme Court in that decision even foresaw the delays that White House counsel threatened us with, and saw them as an argument against any judicial role. The court said, and I quote here, "Opening the door of judicial review to the procedures used by the Senate in trying impeachments would expose the political life of the country to months or perhaps years of chaos." End quote. And the court immediately went on to particularly highlight that concern with respect to the impeachment of a president.
Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse.
It would have been nice if White House counsel, when they were in this chamber arguing for their threatened delays, would have addressed this Supreme Court decision. The Constitution, common sense, and our impeachment precedents all put the responsibility for a Senate trial of impeachment squarely on us. We should never shirk that responsibility. This has been a sad and sordid moment for the Senate. It has done harm enough. Let it not provide any credit to this false White House argument. And let this not be precedent for future presidential misconduct. I yield the floor.
Madam President, the senator from Minnesota is recognized.
Minnesota Democratic Senator Tina Smith, C-SPAN Radio, WCSP-FM, Washington.
This morning, I let Minnesotans know that I will vote to remove President Donald Trump from office. And I rise today because on this historic vote, I want Minnesotans to understand why and where I think we go from here. So I was reluctant to go down the path of impeachment. While I strongly disagree with the president on many issues, I see impeachment as a last resort. And I feared that leaping to impeachment would only serve to drive us even further into our political corners. This changed when I read the whistleblower report, which alleged nothing less than the president